We are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 25 of season 2, I want to talk to you, the people, about a few quick things. As you're going to notice in today's episode, I am repping your one and only, your favorite Detroit Pistons podcast, Revved Up 906 merch. This is our Protect the Ball drop. So make sure to click the link in our YouTube bio or in the description below this video, and that link will shoot you to Grind Clothing Co.'s website, where you can check out a plethora of design options, and you can check out our Protect the Ball merch drop. We have t-shirts, I believe sweatshirts, and crew necks in this design. So make sure to be like your boy and rep Revved Up 906. Also, if you happen to like today's episode and like our channel, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. And if you want to be the first to know whenever we post, turn on that post notifications button. Let's get into episode number 25. All right. Now that the Detroit Pistons 23-24 season has come to an end, it's time. It's that time of the year. It's player evaluations. We're going to evaluate each and every Detroit Pistons player, talk about the statistics, talk about maybe what we expected to what was realistically happened. And then at the end of us evaluating each player, we're going to give them a player grade. Last year, when we wrapped up this whole series of player evaluations, we put a big post on Instagram that listed off every player grade. So if you want to look back on our Instagram, that's in our the description to our Instagram is in the bio below. But so make sure to stay in tune with all of our player evaluations. We take this very seriously. We really enjoy our evaluations. So make sure to keep tuning in each and every week for these next couple of weeks, because we're going to be hitting every single player. Episode number 25, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons rookies in Ausar Thompson and Marcus Sasser. And let's first off start with evaluating Marcus Sasser. His averages this season was 8.3 points per game, nearly 2 rebounds per game, 3 assists, and 54%. His last 5 games of the season, he played his fair share of games. We love to see that. He finished the last game of the season with 17 points in 30 minutes. And then against the Dallas Mavericks, 24. Against the Bulls, the third to last game, 20 points. And then the fifth to last game against Brooklyn had 18 points. So he finished off the season strong. And obviously with players kind of resting, Ryan, we saw him get a boatload of minutes in all of those games, nearly getting 30 minutes per game. Ryan, to kind of start us off when talking about Marcus Sasser and evaluating him, what are some of your first thoughts on his rookie season?
To me, it comes down to where we drafted him to what we got. And where we drafted him, we got him late first round in the 20s. And at that time, everybody's going like, oh, there goes Killian. And right. What does this mean for Jaden Ivey? What does this mean for Cade going forward too? Because it's not that Cade and Jaden Ivey are in question, but what does that outlook look like? Because you recall the Cleveland Cavaliers a couple of years back had drafted Colin Sexton, and then the year later drafted Darius Garland, and they're pretty much along the same build. So there were a lot of questions flowing after this past draft, and our early impressions of Marcus Sasser is like, okay, he can shoot. He's a very good shooter, but he can shoot, he can pass, he can facilitate in general. He's a solid defender. He's scrappy. He's gritty. He's one of those players that you expect to be on like the Bad Boys or the Going to Work Pistons. That's what you would expect. And that's what we got, honestly. What we saw out of Sasser this year is what I expected to get out of him. I'm not saying he was going to blow everybody out of the water and we were going to get this stud. No, I wasn't expecting that, but I was expecting a good, solid overall player. Being when you're drafted that late, typically you're going to the G League or you're seeing the bench, essentially. Him, though, being very experienced, 4 years at Houston, one of the older players on the team and one of the older players in the league, because of that experience at the college level, it allowed him to have a bigger role within this team this season. Now, obviously, there were minutes restrictions at times, and then he's getting more minutes to end out the season. But what he was able to do in such a short period of time to end out the season and then to start the season, it was very impressive to me seeing how well he can manage an offense and how well he can manage a defense just by getting 6, 7 minutes in certain stretches. You have 14 minutes of the overall game or 20 minutes of the overall game. It didn't matter how much time he got on the floor. He was very productive.
Yeah, one thing that you hinted at was the way he was able to control offenses and pass the ball. He only averaged 3 assists per game, but what stood out to me is he's kind of if you're a true purist point guard fan, you're going to like Marcus Sasser just because not everything has to go through him. He moves the ball, he finds the right players. Is his play this year lead to winning basketball? Not necessarily. We know that, but I think in the future he's going to be one of those Jarrett Jack, hopefully a higher ceiling than him. But Jarrett Jack had some pretty good seasons there where you just watch him and you just can get burned on any given night and really just runs an offense and everything kind of comes through him. And I was really impressed with Marcus Sasser. That's why I kind of agree with Troy Weaver picking him up, because he was a guy that had many years in college at Houston. And I believe Ryan was at 3 or 4.
4 years.
Okay, yeah. So 4 years at Houston, he was ready for the NBA, and he kind of proved that with his just rock solid play, much like what Sadiq Bey gave us. So as far as mentioning how Marcus Sasser can on any given night really give the Detroit Pistons an offensive boost, I kind of want to highlight his best game of the season. It was March 25th, and it was a loss against the New York Knicks. 99-124 was the final score. And Marcus Sasser put up 24 points, 6 assists, 1 steal, 1 turnover in just 25 minutes. There's 2 points I want to make there is even when the Detroit Pistons were down and out, Marcus Sasser still showed up. That's a big thing, and that's going to prove to be big in the future as the Detroit Pistons look to improve. And that 2, on any given night, he can go off and be a kind of player where he can decide the fate of what game. Now, the Knicks just trampled us because that's what they do every time we play them. For some odd reason, Julius Randle just has a vendetta against the Detroit Pistons. But I think that Marcus Sasser is one of those game changer players. Ryan, from his rookie year, what are some of the things that stood out in his play style, what he brought to the Detroit Pistons that will kind of prove to be big in upcoming seasons when the Detroit Pistons are trying to flirt with playoff contention? What's going to be his biggest contribution to the Pistons?
I would say how he plays off the pick and roll. We saw that this year in the big play between Wiseman setting screens, Duren setting screens, Stu setting screens, etc. Anybody setting the screen, majority of the time, Sasser was rolling off that to hit a 3. Otherwise, there were times late in the season where he's getting the legs underneath him, he's getting the experience, and he's looking to pass. I think the pick and roll for Marcus Sasser is probably the best part of his game and something that will easily contribute down the road because there's not a lot of guys on this team that excel in that area. Cade does a great job at it. Ivy struggles from time to time, but is still solid. But Sasser just has a knack for it. He's one of those smaller guards, so he has to use a lot of different things to his size, and the pick and roll is just one of them for him. Otherwise, outside of the pick and roll, I don't know necessarily what you could go off of other than it's just his shot. His shot is lethal. Whenever you give him space, he's going to hit that shot. Whenever he's coming off whatever the defense gives him, whether or not it's Cade that's going off of a pick and roll and it's a kick out to Sasser, like whatever it may be, I think him shooting the ball, him facilitating an overall offense, but mainly the pick and roll is going to be the most effective piece to the arsenal of Marcus Sasser going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that too, just because it adds a dimension to the bench that the Detroit Pistons kind of need offensively. They need somebody that can kind of do everything that Cade Cunningham can do, but in his own way. And I think that Marcus Sasser is doing a lot of the things Cunningham can do, right? Shoot, pick and roll, make the right passes, but Marcus Sasser's a little bit more savvy. I'm not saying Cade isn't, but Sasser's just got a way about him. He's just a little sneaky. He's all over the court. I love how active he is. So I agree. I want Marcus Sasser to kind of try to be a mini Cade Cunningham off the bench, not totally emulate everything he does, but do it in his own way and try to match the game plan that Cade Cunningham does each and every night. What is one of the things that impressed you most about Marcus Sasser in his rookie year? Because we know that when he was coming out of Houston and we drafted him, that he was just an absolute sharpshooter. Is it the pick and roll? Is it his passing ability? Is it the way he meshed with the team? What impressed you the most this year with Marcus Sasser?
Honestly, it came to me at times where it didn't look like it was in his favor. So whenever we played good teams, he had great games. You could go as far as he meshed well with the team. I mean, he clicked right away, even from summer league till now. So he's meshed well. His overall game is fantastic with this team. Obviously, again, it did not lead to wins, but there is a lot of promise there. But just the what impressed me the most is how he played against good teams. When you can have your best games in a rookie season against some of the best teams in the league, that is saying something. And granted, he had some of his worst games against some of the worst teams in the league, and that's terrible. But the biggest positive of them all is him in the way he played against the Bucks and then the Clippers earlier on this season. The way he played against them and then the rest of the other good teams, like that is making a statement. That's making a case for him being on the team for a while going forward. Just because whenever you need a big play out of him, he seems like he's always there. He has kind of like this sort of swagger to him, like the chip on the shoulder. Like, hey, you need me, I got you. And that's my favorite part about Sasser and what he brought to this team this year. Because there were moments where the team was struggling. We needed a boost off the bench, but who do you go to? Because at that time, this is before even the trade deadline. But at that time, you're going like, Marvin Bagley, not really. I don't really want him getting this offensive going. Again, there's a lot of guys off the bench this year where it's like, I don't know if I necessarily want the ball in his hands to just try and create something. And then post trade deadline, I mean, Simone Fontecchio was a big pickup for us. But outside of Fontecchio, I mean, do I want Evan Fournier touching the ball? Not really. Do I want Troy Brown Jr. touching the ball? I mean, I'm kind of a fan of his just because of what he's done in Minnesota before the trade deadline, but he just was non-existent for us. But there's a laundry list of guys where it's like, do I want them touching the ball? Not necessarily. But Sasser, give him the ball right now and he'll do something special. And he just has a knack for it. And maybe it's just because he has that experience from college, playing 4 years at that level and excelling rather, is pretty hard to do. And he came out of a good program at Houston with Kelvin Sampson as the coach. In my opinion, one of the better coaches of college basketball history. But the point is, he came out of a good program with a good coach and with a good mindset. And here he is having success in his rookie season, doing everything that program built him to do. And now that he's going to continue to grow and develop his game as time goes on with this Pistons team.
No, I do agree with your point about him showing up big in games that, weren't must wins. People usually counted us out, against those top tier Eastern Conference, Western Conference teams. And Marcus Sasser just always kind of found his way. And I think kind of those deep playoff runs during March Madness at Houston kind of helped him develop that. And I also think that I was talking with a coworker the other day about how some players, any sport, they play so good in the regular season and they show up and it's playoff time and they just throw up duds. I think Marcus Sasser is going to be a huge asset when this Detroit Pistons team does develop. into a playoff team, because he's just the kind of guy that shows up, makes plays happen when you need him to happen. And unfortunately, this wasn't the team for him to make a huge impact on, just because they struggled so bad. But I think one day all this struggle will work out for Marcus Sasser in a big way. Uh, of course, Marcus Sasser's a rookie. We watched almost every game and evaluated and talked about a lot of Pistons games. What's one area you really want to see Marcus Sasser improve from what you saw this season? What will be huge for the Pistons if Marcus Sasser improves on?
His defense. Now, it's not bad. He's very good at defense, but I think him filling the lanes, getting steals will be huge for us, because if we can have a guy that can just pick the pocket of the opposing offensive player, Sasser would be the best player to do that. He's so small and agile and nifty that he can squeak in behind tight closed areas because he's so small, but he has the speed to do so. If he were to defend, I mean, I would throw him against almost any defender. I mean, offensive player rather, just because I think he could be that good in that component. But if he can just improve on his defense, filling the lanes, getting more steals than what he did. I mean, like, if you go off of rookie rankings alone and averages, steals, he had 16th in the rookie rankings per game in steals. Not terrible, but you have Ausar Thompson, who was 5th. And Ausar is great at defense, really good at defense, rather. But then you go as to ranking totals, so like total stat numbers in terms of steals. Sasser was around 13th out of the rookie class, which is pretty good. But if he can just improve on defense, and because that's the one area where I'm like, outside of offense, that's what's lacking for Sasser is defense. And that's crazy to say because he's a solid defender. But if he can improve defensively just a smidge better, I really think that'll have a bigger impact on this team, because it seems like they're trying to establish a defensive identity with Duren, with his shot blocking and his overall defense, Stu with his defense, Ausar Thompson with his defense. It seems like we're trying to build a defensive identity. Like, that's the identity of this team going forward. And if that's the case, then Marcus Sasser improving there, along with his overall intangibles on offense and the rest of the guys, that will be the biggest, I would say, biggest impact for me, is just him improving on his defense alone.
Yeah, and I do see that naturally happening next season, just with the NBA hopefully slowing down for him at this point. You know, we just saw Cade Cunningham say last week that he's finally just now getting to know the NBA. I think that he'll find himself in a defensive rhythm, you know, making mishaps for opposing teams in the passing lanes and stuff like that. One thing I really want to see Marcus Sasser improve on is his shot selection. And that's an easy thing to move on from. You know, we saw Marcus Sasser, even in little minutes, get over double-digit shots up. And it's just kind of funny because I like him taking certain shots, but he was just like an absolute flamethrower. He was throwing up everything. And part of me likes you know, how ambitious he is and how confident he is in himself. But really, that's a funk the Detroit Pistons found themselves in as a whole this season, was throwing up contested shots when they weren't supposed to be shot. And Marcus Sasser was definitely guilty of that. So I think with time and just like anything with time, it'll help. But I really think that's going to be something that the coaches are going to be harping him on when training camp comes around and preseason comes around. And I think that's going to be a big thing for Marcus Sasser. Now that we evaluated him, talked about his rookie year, what would be your final grade for Marcus Sasser on his rookie year?
See, I would lean more towards the B to A range, just because usually and like I said, usually when you're taking late first round, second round, you're not expected to get a lot of minutes right away. But the Pistons saw something in him, and obviously we were able to see it all season long out of him. And so because of that and how big of an impact he had early on, I would have to give him at least a B plus. I could go A, but I think, I mean, you mentioned it with his shooting, and then I mentioned it with his defense there. If those two things weren't as, I guess, questionable as they were this year, I would throw him into the A category or A minus. But I think to me, B plus has to be the grade. I mean, he shot 90 of 240 from three this year. That's not great, but the point is, like I'm giving him a B plus just because if you look at where he was drafted, how big of an impact he had early on this season for us, you have to give him a B plus.
Yeah, I think my head was at B minus. Okay, so that's where my level is. And then I look at the last 10 games and what Marcus Sasser put on paper. And obviously the last 10 games of this season is just brutal. You know, I think everyone was kind of waiting, when's this season going to end? Like, can we just get this done and put it in the books? So I think with the effort Marcus Sasser put in the last 10 games, never putting his head down, still grinding, I'm gonna give him a B with his effort because in the last 5 games, he gave us some really good outings. He did shoot 22% against the Dallas Mavericks, but he had 24 points. So he took a bunch of shots. You kind of love, hate him for that. It's just kind of funny. So I think I'll give Marcus Sasser a B overall, just because he showed to me how resilient he was in a he's not really used to losing, especially at Houston. They weren't a losing program. And for the fact that he's able to come into Detroit and keep a level head, not have any blowups as far as the public knows, and just keep his head down, I think that was really mature of Marcus Sasser. That'll make me give him a B. We've talked about this guy a lot the last couple of weeks. We talked about Amen versus Ausar Thompson. We mentioned him a little bit last week. Let's evaluate Ausar Thompson's rookie year. His averages were nearly 9 points per game, 6 rebounds, which is impressive to me, 1 steal a game, and shot 52% from the field. In his last 5 games, obviously, he was cut short. His season was cut short due to blood clots early in March. His last game was against the Dallas Mavericks, March 9th. He had a rough game, so I'm not even going to talk about that. His best game in March was against the Brooklyn Nets. We won by 6 points, 118 to 112. He had 14 points. 7 rebounds. Man, his rebound just always impresses me. And 3 assists. Marcus Sasser's rookie, Ausar Thompson's rookie year. Some of your first thoughts, Ryan. What impressed you? What kind of hurt to see? Your thoughts?
Well, first off, to me, when a player is taken at 5th overall, you're expecting, okay, he's not good enough to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but you're still expecting a good overall player. And I knew earlier on going into this draft this year, I knew Ausar Thompson, if we were to take him, he was going to be a project. The same with Amen Thompson at 4. I knew if we took either of those two guys, the brothers there, they would be a project. They would need to develop a little bit longer before they have a big overall impact on the team. And that was the case. What Ausar Thompson gave us in overall numbers this year for averages, I expect early to late lottery pick giving us. And that's what hurts me the most. I mean, obviously, Ausar Thompson's a utility man. He's going to do everything for you. He's not going to excel in one category here and there. He's going to fill up the box score no matter what he can each night out. And so because of that, obviously his stats are spread out. But what he was showing us this year, again, it kind of played like he was a late to early lottery pick. He didn't play like he was a top 5 pick. There were moments in time where he's flying head above the rim and you're going, whoa, okay, I can see how that could be a top 5 pick. But like Derek Jones Jr. can do that. And granted, that was mean. That was low. But the point is, like, Ausar Thompson, there were moments in time where you're going, dude, what are you doing right now? And then there were other moments where it's like, okay, that was nice. I see you. And he slowly worked on his 3-point shot from the earlier stage of the season till the end. He actually improved on his 3-point shot, believe it or not, even as bad as it was still to end out the year. So with that being said, what he was able to do this year, it's not like, wow, that's a top 5 pick right there. That's more of like, yeah, that's a lottery pick. I expect to see that out of a player in that regard. But if he wasn't a project and he came in high flying like Sasser did, my goodness, I would have probably I would be hyping him up a little bit more than I am right now.
Yeah, no, I feel that the 5th pick is just so high. You wouldn't typically want to see this from a fifth pick, but he's also not the typical. He's not a go-to scorer. He's not his brother. He's not, some of these other guys. He's not a Scoot Henderson where he can get buckets when he wants. He's that project, that defensive minded guy, and he's got the stature of an NBA player, and that can just be a dominant physical force. His best game of the season was January 21st versus the Milwaukee Bucks in a loss, 135-141. His statistics were 22 points, 9 rebounds, 1 block in 32 minutes. Another thing to note with Ausar is he also plays pretty well against pretty tough teams. That's one thing to note about our two rookies and evaluating them this season is they both played pretty rock solid against starter teams. And that's with Ausar Thompson having starter minutes. He more than likely started that game, but I'm not exactly sure. But it's kind of interesting to take note of that. Like, okay, they're playing pretty good against some elite level teams. I have an interesting comparison before we wrap up today's episode. I was looking at statistics, and Ausar Thompson has always kind of reminded me about this certain player. And I'm going to be talking about comparing Ausar Thompson to a young Kawhi Leonard. So Kawhi Leonard, his rookie year, averaged 8 points, 7.9, but 8 points. Ausar Thompson, 8 points. A young Kawhi Leonard averaged 5 rebounds. Ausar Thompson, 6. Kawhi Leonard, 1 steal per game. Ausar Thompson, 1 steal per game. Kawhi Leonard played 64 games in his rookie year in the 2011-2012 season. Ausar Thompson played 63. 63 games is, it's just kind of weird how they were that close. I think Kawhi Leonard rather has him a little bit in height, but I think we might be onto something here. And we have to remember too, with this Kawhi Leonard is, I believe they are like 2 or 3 seasons away from a championship. So we're talking about a little bit older, but still kind of in his late prime, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker. The team is still kind of in its roots, kind of slowly in the next couple of years will leak away. But I think I see a lot of Ausar Thompson and Kawhi Leonard just with that freakish athleticism. Kawhi Leonard wasn't immediate or mid-range guy, 3-point shooter. He has grown into that in his late stages with the Spurs. He did not have that right away. And then obviously they're both just great defensive players, great rebounders right away. That's another thing. I knew Ausar Thompson was uber athletic, did the little things. I didn't realize he was going to average 6 rebounds per game. I'm pretty impressed with that. You don't really see that from a whole lot of rookies that are small forwards. It just kind of impressed me a little bit. But Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on Ausar Thompson being compared to a young Kawhi Leonard?
I wouldn't say you're very far off. There are a lot of similarities there. Kawhi Leonard 6'7", Ausar Thompson is right there in that ballpark, around 6'6", 6'7" there. So height there, weight it's not there, but it's close. But overall impact on what they were able to do. I wouldn't say it's far-fetched, given the fact that they're right neck and neck in terms of overall stats goes. But Kawhi had him a little bit beat on the 3-point shot, shooting 37% his rookie year, where Ausar Thompson has definitely struggled, being 18% from 3. But
yeah,
outside of the 3-point shooting and the overall shooting, defensively and stats goes, it's pretty similar. And you look back at that team that year, the Spurs went 50-16, lost in the Western Conference Finals to the Oklahoma City Thunder, 4-2. In that series. And that team, you would have had Tiago Splitter, Matt Bonner, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, etc. And so that team at that time, it's kind of flip-flopped between the Pistons and the Spurs there, obviously being the Pistons having the worst record in franchise history. But the point is, you look at the similarities in terms of overall talent. The Pistons right now have a lot of talent. They just haven't produced anything yet. But the fact that they have so much talent, and then you look to add a guy in like Ausar Thompson, and at that time you go to the Spurs now. The Spurs before they went 50-16 that season, they were coming off another good season there. I mean, any season with Pop is good, but for the most part there, they were coming off a good season. They take Kawhi Leonard, and they didn't need him at that time, but it helped. And granted, we needed Ausar Thompson because we suck, but it still helped having him with us. So I don't think it's a far stretch of a comparison. I think there are a lot of similarities there, but the biggest difference is the fact that the Spurs were good and the Pistons suck. Outside of that, if you take the team out of it, I would say it's fair, but we need to see what Ausar Thompson does his second year in the league to fully commit and go like, okay, yeah, he's the next Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, and the funny thing is to me is Ausar Thompson was able to do that with a current Detroit Pistons team that's horrible, and then Kawhi Leonard did that with like a Hall of Fame team. So it kind of proves to me a little bit that, you know, Ausar Thompson compared to past players, a guy to the what turned into a great player, it's kind of impressive to me that, like, okay, he matched and did a little bit more than Kawhi Leonard did with a worse team. We're running out of time here. Ryan, what's your final grade for Ausar Thompson on his rookie year?
To me, because he was a top 5 pick, that is going to damper my grade on him.
Totally.
If he wasn't a top 5 pick and we got him in the lottery there, I'd be going like, okay, I could give him a B. But to me, I have to give him C plus, C, maybe around there, just because when you're taking him in top 5, you're expected to produce right away. And he did here and there, but it wasn't top 5 worthy. It was lottery worthy. And so because of that, I do have to give him a C, unfortunately, because I do like Ausar Thompson, but he is a developmental project. He's not a for sure player right away.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to give Ausar Thompson a C on his rookie season. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.